This is the
Five Starr
Podcast.
Let me talk to you. This is such good shit. What do you guys want to talk about?
Plenty of things to cover today. School year's winding down. It's pandemonium and chaos at work. Most of the time I can't figure out whether to scratch my watch or wind my butt. But we'll make it. I don't know if AEW will make it, but that's a whole other conversation entirely. In the lead up to this show, throughout the entire week, a thought kept hitting me. You know, we're seeing a lot of news surrounding this potential new Saturday show that AEW might be doing in June. You got the whole Forbidden Door thing they're going to be advertising soon. You got the Wembley show later this summer. You got all these upcoming events that are down the pike, things people are buzzing about. And then there's the current on-screen product, the stuff that's actually happening right now. And a lot of it just doesn't reflect the attention these other shows are getting. Remember when Rampage was one of the hottest topics? You remember when we all thought the Friday show was going to be the perfect way for AEW to sort of split off its roster and give the guys more attention that we weren't seeing on the Dynamite shows a lot of the time? Now look at that show. It is such a blimp on the radar, even the biased wrestling media isn't covering it. Because they know what it is. It's a joke of a TV show. They did that great number for the Punk debut. In every show since then, it's been a downward spiral. And I just keep wondering, again, not to be a skeptic, that's just my natural inclination when I watch this product every week, going by track record. What happens when that potential Saturday show becomes the same thing? What happens when the Wembley event is over and we see how things actually turn out? Whether or not it's a sellout, I'm just curious. What if the card sucks? If they're drawing a house purely based off the company name, that can maybe work in the interim. Maybe for a year or two. But what about 3, 4, 5, 6 years from now? Is it going to appeal to the same market? It's the problem AEW's had since they first started as a company. We were promised all these big things. They like to throw up the flashy graphics and have the announcers scream in our faces about how star-spangled awesome things are going to be. But what's the payoff a lot of the time? Disappointment? Unfulfillment? Dissatisfaction? And with AEW, it's always more content, more television product, more YouTube shows, more exclusive footage. I mean, I didn't even talk about AEW All Access. How's that show working out for you? Remember the big special announcement that Tony Khan promised us? The one that we thought was going to be huge and groundbreaking? How did that turn out? And I don't see the problem lessening. I see this becoming more of an issue for AEW, where they'll just keep compiling more stuff, more content, more shows, more this, more that. And it's not going to fix the problems that have been overlying this company since they first started. The bad booking, the lack of compelling storytelling from week to week, logical character development, lack of larger-than-life personalities, baby faces and heels you actually can get behind. These are the most fundamental basics that made wrestling so successful for the last 50, 60, 70 plus years. And we bastardized this product so badly, this is what we're left with in 2023. A product that, by and large, only appeals to the most hardcore, loyal fan base and doesn't even really seem to do a great job at that a lot of the time. Look at the viewership from week to week. The drop-off rate is actually kind of worrying if you look at it on paper. And we're in the thick of it right now. We've gone about 7 months without one sighting of Punk. And whether or not people want to argue that being a good thing or a bad thing, the one thing you can't ever deny is that when Punk was around, numbers were up, attention was up, intrigue was up. We see what a post-Punk AEW looks like, and it ain't pretty. It's been a horrible television product since the whole media scrum debacle went down, and it's only getting worse. They used to be able to crack 1 million viewers during their key segments on their shows. Now they're lucky to draw somewhere in the mid-900s. And when does it become a point where they start showing concern? When do they start recognizing that something isn't adding up? How bad do the numbers have to get? 700,000? 600,000? Do they have to reach their Rampage numbers at the current moment at the 400,000 to 500,000 mark before Tony wakes up and realizes that he has an issue? You can keep dishing out all the new play toys you want, Tony. It ain't going to fix the problem. You could false advertise a special announcement every week until the end of time. It ain't going to fix the problem. You need a competent booker and a competent agent to sit down with you and go over these shows with a fine-tooth comb. Cut out the bull crap. Highlight your strengths, wherever they lie. And start trying to market your product to the disgruntled fans that stopped watching after you basically ran them off with putting on a rotten television show. How about you try to earn some of their trust back? Because the people that have stopped watching, that dip in the viewership we've seen over the last 7 months, those are the fans that you probably should be going after. And there is a way to win them back. Do better. Put on a better TV show. So yeah, about that Dynamite show. Yeah, remember when Roderick Strong debuted last week? Well, they already fucking killed that guy. Think about how completely inept you have to be as a booker to screw something like this up. You take a guy in Roderick Strong, someone that actually has some ring experience, someone that has a little bit of name power to him, someone that used to be one of the featured talents back under the old NXT banner years ago, someone that you'd maybe want to establish with a new audience considering he literally just showed up a week ago. Yes, as always, there's going to be a caveat. The marks are going to know who he is. But again, if the goal is to actually grow your product and expand your audience, I know I'm speaking in hypotheticals for a minute, but work with me here. If that's the goal, then obviously, as a promoter, it would be smart to try and book him in a match where he's able to get himself over to the AEW audience. Again, a guy that actually has some name credibility to him. So you take that guy, you sign him, and his first match with your company, not a singles match, not a match where he's being the one showcased, not a match where the sole design is to get over Roddy. No, you see, in the mind of our genius booker-in-chief, Tony Cocaine Khan. Instead, he thought it would be more productive to throw him out there with 7 other dudes, the majority of which are the bottom of the barrel when it comes to the dreck that is modern pro wrestling today, the outlaw abominations that do nothing but defecate on whatever's left of this once great profession. And again, instead of Roddy being the featured star in the match, no, he's nothing more than a bit player. And it figures. Tony fucking Khan just can't help himself. He couldn't even do something like have Roddy just team with Adam Cole and wrestle 2 of the Jericho jobbers. No, he just had to throw the fucking company mascot in there. For literally no reason. There was absolutely no need for him to be a part of this thing. Just there to collect space and be a nuisance like he's been since day fucking 1. Why did this need to be an 8-man? Why couldn't you just do Roderick Strong versus a Danny Garcia or something? Or if you're trying to tie in things with the Cole-Jericho feud, why couldn't it be Cole and Strong versus Matt Retard and Angelo Parker? Was Bandito needed for this match? No. Was the company mascot needed for this match? No. But of course they were going to get shoehorned in there because, Tony has a porn addiction when it comes to Orange Cassidy. He just loves beating off to this fishy white fuckstick. And it immediately makes the whole thing a joke. I mean, the Jericho appreciators don't make it any more valuable. Roddy's just a cog in the wheel. Adam Cole's in the worst shape of all of them combined, including the mascot. And for the record, correct me if I'm wrong here. I know I'm one to easily forget things, especially in this stupid company, but I wasn't born yesterday either. Were Adam Cole and Orange Cassidy not bitter rivals sometime over a year ago? What happened there? Did they reconcile off camera and we never found out about it? After the infamous angle where Cassidy beat Cole in an unsanctioned match via hug, where they fell like 10 feet through a crash pad and Orange Cassidy got a fluke pin on him? We're just wiping that from the entire backstory? Like we just pretend it never happened? I mean, I know kayfabe's been dead for 20-something years now, but Jesus H. Christ. What the fuck? So that was roughly the first 20 minutes of the show right there, give or take. And you're probably asking, wait, you mean you didn't watch it? Of course I didn't fucking watch it. Why would I? What's the need? Before the bell even rang, I saw all 8 guys standing there across the ring from each other playing with their dicks. Apparently they needed some sort of cue for the bell to sound before they could lay a hand on each other. As if that's ever mattered in this stupid fucking company. Where every match kickstarts with a brawl and a crowd fight. And let me guess. Going by rote here, Cassidy did every stupid antic in the book, including the fake kicks, probably put his hands in his pockets and played with himself, the weak-ass sissy punches and slaps. I'm sure Bandito did a million fucking flips and dives. There was probably a lot of bad comedy involved. Jericho probably destroyed everybody's eardrums on commentary with his piercing, shrilly voice. And if I had to guess, because this is AEW we're talking about here, I'll just go out on a limb and say they probably weren't even smart enough to have Roddy get the pin. Probably gave it to Orange Cassidy because they're fucking idiots. Am I wrong about any of that? Did I miss anything there? Let me know in the comments. If you even so chose to watch this match. I'll just go ahead and skip to what I saw next. Not that it was a particularly great segment, it wasn't. Just your average day at the park with Jungle Jack Perry trying to pretend like he has any kind of personality on the microphone. And Darby Allin just kind of having that lost soul expression on his face, as per normal. Trying to hype up the main event match that had absolutely no suspense or drama to it. because everybody knew what the outcome was going to be the minute they announced it on last week's show. There's called suspension of disbelief. And then there's the finished outcome that is so predictable, our ancestors could have foreseen it before AEW was even a concept. We'll talk about that later, though. We came back for more brawling, though. Because, can't ever get enough of that in a given week. This visual, it was funny because you had Adam Cole getting restrained by like 8 security guys trying to boot him out of the building while Jericho's sort of pursuing and goading them on. The funniness is the idea that it would believably take 8 security guards to hold a guy like Adam Cole back. Because, look at him, for one. And then there's the whole Britt Baker angle that just kind of seemed to get thrown in there to stir up more attention to the t-shirt drama, which I also did not talk about in that opening 8-man tag that I skipped watching. That whole story blew up over the last several days, and quite frankly, I still don't understand what the whole drama is to begin with. I mean, it's a hideous t-shirt for one. Looks like something a 7th grader would have made in his graphic design class in middle school. How it's controversial is beyond me, though. A black-eyed Britt Baker? So what? We saw more graphic footage of Britt when she got her nose busted open a while back. People weren't drumming up controversy when AEW tried to print t-shirts off that. So what's the issue? The issue is that there are AEW marks out there that are actually retarded enough to buy one of those shirts and wear it out in public. That's where the real issue comes in. But I don't put anything past a lot of the AEW sheep. I really don't. If AEW shops started printing shirts of Tony Khan taking a piss at the local Exxon, people would still buy them. AEW fans don't have standards. Look at the fucking television product. That ought to tell you something right there. So this is just a stupid story. Just people trying to stir up controversy for the sake of it, off key issues that have nothing to do with the actual ongoing problems. Speaking of low-budget presentation, in the weekly installment of This Production Team Has No Clue What They're Doing Because They All Suck at Their Jobs, we had about 15 seconds go by where Bryan Danielson was speaking with no audio. Just complete dead air time. Meanwhile, he's surrounded by the Blackpool Combat Cucks, all of whom are completely worthless and mean absolutely nothing to the overall bottom line. Claudio's a dude. Flatwheel Yuta is about as effective on camera as a legless guy trying to run a marathon. And Jon Moxley still tries and utterly fails every week to be Stone Cold Steve Austin. And speaking of the oil mechanic, he's apparently going to be having a cage match next week with Kenny Omega. Promises to dish out new weapons. A more lethal side of Jon Moxley is what he advertised. Well, you know what? I'll give him this. At least he's saying the quiet part out loud. At least he's now openly admitting, I'm going to slice open my arteries and drink the blood, lick the bones, and eat the flesh. Because Lord knows, it wouldn't be a Jon Moxley match if he didn't sodomize himself with a fucking butcher's knife every time he wrestled. So while we eagerly anticipate that bloodbath, what do you say we talk about Saraya versus Willow Nightingale? Actually, on second thought, let's not talk about it because I actually got up to go to the bathroom during this match. But luckily for me, made it back just in time to see the start of this Trios de Mayo Battle Royal. Another one of Tony Khan's favorite go-tos in wrestling, meaningless Battle Royals, where he fills the ring with a bunch of underneath job guys that are all mainly wastes of contracts. Just a lame excuse to fill bodies and give people something to do. Instead of just, maybe firing them because most of them suck. It is a battle royal where I have no idea what's at stake, no idea what's on the line, who to root for, who to boo. And to make matters even more complicated and more incomprehensible, it is a tag team battle royal, which invariably means that I have no idea who is teaming with whom. The only thing I saw were 18 guys in the ring doing shit. Again, no idea who the baby faces are, who the heels are, why any of this mattered, or why I should care. I mean, this whole thing was just their way of trying to validate why the trios division is still even a thing at this point. We all know it's a complete joke. Well, I should say, rational-minded people with a functioning brain know it's a joke. Everyone did a bunch of sloppy indie spots for a while. At one point, the Lucha Fucks mistimed a double elimination spot so badly where Hobbs was supposed to clothesline them over the top rope at the same time. So, of course, Hobbs gets the Pentadork over, but Phoenix has to stand there in prone position for an extra 10 seconds to wait for Hobbs to take him out, too. Looks so low rent. It boiled down to the Acclaimed, Butcher, Blade, Kip Sabian's stupid fucking pink hairdo, and John Silver. Because obviously the job order was going to be a featured part of this match. Yeah, they were going to make it to the final three. And after Blade got dumped by Bowens, he and Billy Gunn hit simultaneous famousers on the Butcher and Sabian, dumped them out at the same time, and they won. Whoopee. So I presume they're next in line for the House of Drek and their belts. That's what our genius booker had in mind for the Acclaimed, after their super hot run at the top as the biggest babyface team in the entire company once upon a time. The former AEW World Tag Team Champions, I should add. They are now having to work in the Elite's conjured up trios division, getting sidetracked with that whole crew. I wonder who to push for that. Come to think of it, there was that time the Acclaimed were closely tied with CM Punk on AEW television. Punk was very influential in helping to establish those guys and do business with them. Just... if only there was a way to somehow figure out how the Acclaimed are now getting sabotaged and wedged into the middle of this trios division stuff. If only we had a way to map out and connect the dots. Friends with CM Punk, the Elite not liking CM Punk, not liking the people that were close friends with CM Punk by association. Yeah, I got nothing. Drawing blanks. Okay, in all seriousness here, I went back and forth on it for a while, but I think I'm sold on it. Well, at least I was until I saw the main event. The MJF Sammy Guevara working agreement story easily was one of the best things on this show. Not just in the sense that I can totally buy the idea that it's two smug douchebag heels coexisting together and pretending to be friends when the reality is we both know they can't stand each other, but they were actually pulling it off really well. It is easily the best thing I've ever seen Sammy do. When I don't have to watch him wrestle and I can just watch him be a prick on camera, he's actually really good at that. Go figure. A real-life douchebag actually being able to work a douchebag role on camera. Who'd have thought? But I was actually really entertained by this. Like the whole thing where Guevara called out MJF last week for ditching him in the parking lot when Guevara clearly saw nobody else was in the car. MJF fake crying and trying to lull Sammy into a false sense of security. Quote of the night. After Sammy establishes that him and MJF are going to be in the main event at Double or Nothing, MJF goes, "That's right, and Sammy's going to lay down for me like a little bit. I mean my best friend." But don't worry, because MJF worked it out with the production team, and he got them mashed up theme music for later on. And I even wrote down ahead of myself, I'm going to be so sad when these two eventually fuck each other. Not in the literal sense. Although with the way they've been interacting on camera lately, the kissing, the hugging, the weird affection, it's a little suspect. But again, up until I saw the main event and how they paid it off, this was my favorite moment of the show. But as we know, so often the story goes, all good things must come to an end. Speaking of such, Wardlow. He wrestled another match for the TNT title. Nothing really to say about it. It was just a quick squash. I already kind of covered how the novelties worn off with the Wardlow gimmick. And they shot themselves in the foot over a year ago by not capitalizing on the momentum they had with him. At this point, they're kind of just swimming up Schitt's Creek without a paddle, trying to reconcile it. I mean, on the one hand, I can maybe give him credit for trying to make it work, but is it too late? Been asking that question for well over a year now, and I think they missed the mark. But hey, at least we establish who he's now defending the TNT title against. It will apparently not be the Dinosaur. It is going to be Christian Cage, which I did know was a much better option to go with. Still doesn't account for Arn Anderson being his mouthpiece from out of the blue for seemingly no reason. But again, we are long past the point of trying to make sense of anything with AEW. So instead, I will just move on and talk about the next match. I'm not even going to draw any attention to that skit they shot with Jarrett, Lethal, Sanjay, Bootleg Kali, and Jay Briscoe on the ranch in Sandy Fork, Delaware, or wherever they were. The extent of what I wrote down was as follows. This acting was more hideous than anything I've seen on Raw in the last 30 years. And no, Papa Briscoe was not enough to save it. I will say this, though. Going back to what I touched on at the beginning with that comment about them neutering Roderick Strong on week 2. Remember when they had a chance to make Mark Briscoe one of their hottest babyfaces earlier this year? Trying to capitalize on the admiration he got from the fans after the whole Jay passing. Giving them a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to really milk that moment and run with it. Well, they blew their chance. Again. Now they got Mark doing bad comedy skits with more bad comedy acts. And the acting is worse than your typical C-level Lifetime movie. But going to the next match, it's Ricky Starks versus Juice Robinson. Probably another clear-cut case of a guy I've said they missed the boat on a time or two. Instead of taking a guy like Ricky Starks, who could have had an extensive world title feud with MJF a few months ago, now he's stuck mid-carding with New Japan guys no one gives a fuck about. And Shawn Spears. And a lot of this is just regurgitation from things I've said previously in AEW matches, but I mean, the formula is so repetitive at this point. They spent 2 minutes in the ring doing some basic stuff. This obviously went through a commercial break. And from the time the bell sounded to start the match, up to when they first pitched to the break, 10% of the match had occurred in the ring. The other 90% has been on the floor nonstop. It's obvious they've been fighting out there for well over a 10 count. And of course, the ref just stands there and lets it happen anyway. And of course, they come back from break and both guys are in there trading spots. There's not even a real sense of a heat spot or anything. It's literally just both guys going back and forth and doing stuff. At one point, Excalibur's putting over how sick one of Ricky's DDTs looked on Juice. Of course, Juice is right back up, no-selling it 10 seconds later and hitting another move on him. Like I said, there's no heat or drama to what's going on. They're just trading moves. And right at the end, they did about 1 million back and forth counters. Excalibur kept calling one of Robinson's moves, "The juice is loose." I almost had a fucking heart attack. The absurdity was so overbearing. And then Ricky caught him with a spear. Rochambeau. 1, 2, 3. Not a terrible match, just kind of the prototypical modern video game style match. A lot of moves, a lot of counters, a lot of kickouts, not much in the way of milking big moments or trying to tell any kind of meaningful story. Also led to the inevitable afterbirth where Jay White ran in to jump Ricky. Because duh, that was going to happen. And again, not to beat a dead horse with this talking point, but if you're a Ricky Starks fan, I don't understand how you can objectively look at this feud and think it's good. Not only is it totally counterproductive in keeping Ricky hot as a character on television, but the feud itself is so random. Did they ever actually explain why Jay White specifically targeted Ricky Starks? Did they ever explain what his motive was? Did they ever explain how or why Shawn Spears got mixed into all this? What am I missing here? How is this serving Ricky in any way? And what's it leading to exactly? Juice Robinson and Jay White versus Ricky Starks and Shawn Spears, a double or nothing? A fucking top of the hour TV match on Dynamite? And you're expecting people to pay money for that? I just don't understand this program at all. It's not a natural fit. Jay White just randomly showed up on TV like 3 weeks ago. I'm yet to figure out what his deal is, why he's in AEW, what his end goal is, blah, blah. Juice Robinson, I don't really care. Shawn Spears has been on the federal witness protection list for so long now. Him just popping up out of nowhere again is totally arbitrary. I don't know. Maybe all of this was explained on AEW Dark or something. Who knows? All I know is that this feud is not for me, and it's not really doing much for me in the way it's been presented on television. That's what I know. But I'm more or less ready to get to the end of this thing, so why don't we talk about the main event? With the totally unpredictable finish that nobody ever saw coming, it's Sammy Guevara and MJF versus Darby Allin and Jungle Jack Boy Jinder Heimerschmidt. If the heels win, the double or nothing main event remains Guevara versus MJF, as per the regulations of their original Pillars tournament that they wasted our time with over the last 2 weeks. If the babyfaces win, it becomes a four-way. And this match, I both loved and hated this match at the exact same time. And I know that kind of sounds oxymoronic, but hear me out as I explain this. First and foremost, the finish pissed me off because I've been griping since they were first teasing this feud. I hated the idea of them doing the four-way. I didn't have a problem with the whole tournament theme they were doing over the last couple weeks, but now that we know that was a complete waste of time and energy, and now we're getting the four-way anyway, now I'm even more pissed off because they wasted my time. And then there's the actual layout of this match. And we basically had two themes going on here. We had the storytelling component with Sammy and MJF working together. And then we had pretty much the rest of the match where everybody was just kind of doing moves. Anytime MJF was involved, things made sense. He knows how to work the crowd. He knows how to slow things down and time spots correctly. Like the deal early on where the ref is dealing with Jungle Boy and MJF on the floor. Meanwhile, Darby's in the ring choking Sammy with MJF's scarf. And then a few seconds later, MJF comes in to try to break it up, but the Darby wraps the scarf around him too and starts choking him with it. That was a clever spot. I like that. It's simple, but it's using the heel's gimmick against them in a manner of humiliating them when the ref's not paying attention. A little bit of reverse psychology there, but, Sammy and Max are good enough weasels to make a spot like that work. And the reason was because they did a spot earlier where Sammy pulled out a gimmick from his trunks and tried to choke Darby with it. I guess it was tape, but again, he tried to use it in plain view of the official, and MJF's trying to run a distraction while it's all going on. We've seen MJF do similar spots like that during his matches, so again, taking angles and ideas from previous matches and trying to incorporate them here logically. good. And again, the reason Sammy and Max were the highlights of this match were that when they were blatantly cheating, it was all done in moderation and it kept things exciting throughout the match. There was ebb and flow. Grabbing each other's hands for leverage when the ref's not looking, cutting off the baby faces. This is all what heels are supposed to do in tag matches. Cheat. Act like dirtbags. Do devious shit. You know, the hot tag to Jungle Boy was fine. Sammy and MJF fed for him well. Wasn't really a fan of the 6 consecutive dive spots out to the floor. Mostly in the sense that MJF and Sammy looked stupid for just standing there and waiting to catch the fucker on his way down. Would have been easy enough for one of them to just move like 3 inches to the left or the right. Jungle Boy would have face planted like an idiot. But of course, that's modern wrestling for you, where everybody has to do a fucking dive in every match. Did anyone else see that Tiger Driver spot that Jungle Boy gave to Sammy where it looked like he killed him? I rewound and watched that back like 3 times. I thought Sammy landed right on the back of his neck. I mean, that looked really bad. But again, though, going back to what I said about liking the Sammy-MJF dynamic, I even got a kick out of the spot where MJF teased he was going to do the synchronized dive out to the floor with Sammy, but when they both hit the ropes and started running, MJF just stopped. Meanwhile, Sammy looked up at him like, dude, what the fuck? And of course, the reason that's funny is that MJF's entire shtick is, I don't need to do dives and kill myself because I'll always be more over than all 3 of you schmucks combined. So yeah, go right ahead. Destroy your body. Do stupid stuff. I'll just be up here working the crowd, getting another 15 to 20 years out of my career. Meanwhile, you guys will all be retired by the time you're 35. And then we had the whole finish angle, the breakdown in communication with Sammy and MJF that came to a head. And on the one hand, I will say, if the end goal was to ensure that this match was a 4-way by the end, I understand the story here. You had the heels get into an argument over who should get the pin. You know, they're blind tagging each other, illegally, by the way, slapping each other's thighs and backs and not using direct hand-to-hand contact. But nitpicky stuff. And it boils over when MJF slaps Guevara. Guevara returns the favor and thrust kicks Max in the face. And from there, we get Darby and Jungle Boy making the comeback. Jungle Boy hits a running elbow off the ropes, but gets blind tagged by Darby. Darby hits the coffin drop. 1, 2, 3. So now there's a little bit of uneasiness with Darby and Jungle Boy's relationship because they basically pulled the same stunt. I more or less thought it would have maybe served them better to drag out the MJF-Sammy friendship all the way to the pay-per-view and blow off the turn there. Yes, he can still have MJF walk out with a strap, but at least you go in thinking both guys are still on the same page and they're going to work together to handicap the baby faces. Now we're basically at an even Steven point where everybody hates each other again, but now the heels aren't going to be on the same page to work together. You know, Darby and Jungle Boy, that one's still up in the air a little bit. I always think the dynamics of 3-ways and 4-ways work better when you have the heels teaming up to isolate the baby faces. Makes for an overall better story. And, you know, that way you could maybe spend a few weeks having Sammy and MJF target Darby and Jungle Boy in angles, injuring them, putting them at a disadvantage. Now you can't really do that. Just my 2 cents on the matter, but hey, what do I know? It's a 4-way now, and that kind of dumped on my enjoyment of this by the end. Because like I said, as a match, I actually thought it was fine. There was some coherency to what was going on here. More coherent than anything I saw on the show up to this point. It's the problem, though, where they've been teasing the 4-way for so long, it's hard for me to really care about anything else that happens on the show in the lead up to that match now. I mean, the best thing they had going was the Sammy MJF pairing. They already blew that off here on free television. So what now? You spend the next 3 weeks having everybody cut promos on each other? Is that really what we need? Is more uncharismatic jabronis cutting middle school drama promos on each other? Talking about who has the bigger dick? I don't know. I mean, I'm not saying you couldn't have still gotten to the same point where you got the four-way result. I'm just saying I would have done it differently. I'd have maybe done some kind of slip on a banana peel finish where the baby faces win, but it doesn't entirely damage the relationship with Sammy and Max. Or, maybe Max does something devious behind Sammy's back that costs him the match, but Sammy doesn't realize it because, I don't know, he's an idiot or something. I mean, there were things you could do, but instead they went with this, and nah. Still, best thing on the show is the main event. The previous hour and 30-something minutes, that all about sucked a cock. I still have no emotional investment in the Double or Nothing pay-per-view on the 28th. Even so, I might not be the only one. More of the focus and the attention seems to be diverted to this Wembley Stadium show in August. And while, yes, it's good to be covering how the ticket sales are doing and the buzz that's currently surrounding all that, is it going to be another case of throwing another AEW pay-per-view under the bus before we get there? Double or Nothing is what? 3 weeks out? As of this point, we have, I believe, according to the wiki page, one match announced. The four-way for the world title. And if you're trying to sell a card based on that match alone, probably going to need a little more than that. I talk so often about the problem with AEW's formula when it comes to the way they structure their pay-per-view models. They build up like 2 or 3 things along the way, a lot of it being poorly done, and then they kind of round out the card with a bunch of last-minute throw-ins that either get little or no attention on the TV show. Aside from the four-way, they've been building up Jericho versus Cole, which has been awful. Whatever's going on in the girls' division, I don't even care at this point. I mean, I'm not really even paying attention to any of that. There's the Wardlow Christian thing, which just kind of happened out of nowhere. Like Christian and Luchasaurus just showed up one week and all of a sudden they were title contenders. That's how they introduced the feud, at least. What about FTR? I mean, I think they're still doing the thing with Lethal and Jarrett, but again, it hasn't been built up that well on television as a feud. What am I missing? The Elite BCC shit. That's all kinds of horrific. But on the other hand, there is a part of me that's kind of sadistically looking forward to that cage match next week. Moxley versus Omega. I'm going to watch that. It's going to be all kinds of horrible because Moxley's involved. But I might be mildly amused by the stupidity of that. Possibly. We'll see. We're back to the Can Network music this week. Also no 80s commercial spots like we saw in the YouTube version last time. And because they had to just kick me on the groin from the jump this week, who should be the first set of guys in the center spotlight but the new hottest act in Crockett Promotions, the New Breed. They're new, and they're definitely a breed of some description. Beyond just being time travelers and behaving all wacky on camera, it's taken me like 3 weeks to try and figure out whether or not they're supposed to be faces or heels. As far as I know, I remember their on-screen persona being that more of heel than babyface. Although the studio crowd kind of runs hot and cold with them depending on whatever they're attempting to say during their interview time. In any case, they were part of the opening VTR this week that went about 20 seconds. And then they immediately cut to the studio with Chris Champion and the other guy, Royal. Was it Sean Royal? I wanted to say Nelson Royal for some reason, but I think that was another one of the job guys. Well, anyway, they were conducting their own interview at the podium. Royal standing there talking about how they're going to futuristically disintegrate Bullet Bob and Brad Armstrong. I nearly vomited in my mouth. We were only 30 seconds in by this point. Now, obviously, that was being designed to plug one of the big TV matches for later on. They were scheduled to face off in the next round of the U.S. Tag Title Tournament. And I know I keep saying this every week, but this New Breed tag team, not a fan. I remember not liking them when I used to go back and watch old tapes of them as a kid. And seeing them here in my adult years, my opinion still hasn't changed. They're still really rotten. Still don't think I hate them as much as I hated the Dynamic Dudes, but it's a pretty rail-thin margin. While we're on the subject of bad gimmick ideas, Jimmy Valiant and Lasertron were in the opening match this week. They wrestled Randy Barber and Alan Martin. And I'm not factoring in Handsome Jimmy as a bad gimmick idea. I mean, his entire persona was a gimmick in and of itself, so I can at least excuse that. But Lasertron, yeah, that shit sucked too. Not one of Dusty's finer moments. In the minds of the studio fans, they were about as over as Ricky Morton and Robert Gibson. But the hardcore fans, this duo was about as wacky as any combination of the Paul Jones army we saw throughout '86. Poor Hector, man. But the people were into this because they love Jimmy Valiant. And they did some stuff for a few minutes. There was a spot where Martin went to try and monkey flip Hector out of the corner, and Hector was supposed to land on his feet, but he sort of slipped and hit the ring mat. So to make up for it, they did a spot about a few seconds later where Hector countered a back body drop and landed on his feet then. And then he tagged in Valiant so he could hit a running elbow drop for the 3. I wrote down to conclude my notes here. We were approximately 5 minutes into the show, and we have seen every single wacky undercard goofball in the entire roster. And again, no offense to Jimmy Valiant. I love Handsome Jimmy. But looking at the shit he's been involved with over the last year on television, I think it's safe to say he wasn't exactly doing some serious work by this point in his career. But Nikita Koloff sure was. He was more serious than a Lance Storm promo. And he fired up this week, talking about how Lex Luger isn't a 4 horseman. The only thing he is a horse's behind. Talking about how Dick Murdoch is also going to be back next week. And if he thinks that the Russians are going to target Nikita when he's not looking, he's got Dusty looking over his shoulder too. So that Murdoch will feel the wrath of the Russian sickle. Then he took off his shirt, he flexed, and he stuck his tongue out and went, eh. And, well, first I laughed, and then I said, wouldn't want to be Captain Redneck right now. Coming back from suspension, then having that big fucking bear breathing down your neck. No, thank you. I'll take the extended paid vacation, thank you very much. Going back to Luger and Nikita's promo, though, he was out next to wrestle a quick squash with a newbie, Jeff Belk. The guy that actually looked almost as physically impressive as Luger from a physique standpoint. He actually had an inch or two on him in height. And, oh, poor Lex. Poor Lex had a bad showing here. I have seen a lot of tapes of Luger not being able to get big guys up for the rack. That was probably a little later on in his career when Luger had more experience and he knew how to cover up for the botches. I still remember that one match he had on Nitro from like the late 90s where he was wrestling one of the guys from the power plant system. Big dude. Can't remember his name for the life of me. But it took him like 3 attempts to get him up on his shoulders for the rack. And he actually played it up as a story because the first time he failed to pick him up, like the crowd all kind of farted at it because it was an obvious fuck up, but he did cover up for it. Here, it was a bit of a different story. Jeff Belk was around the same size as Luger, so when Luger went to whip him off the ropes and catch him for a power slam, he barely was able to get the guy up and turn him over. And then about 5 seconds later, he goes to try and pick him up for the rack, and he gets him about partially up, and after about 2 seconds, he stumbles forward into the ropes and drops him. And I was like, ugh, damn, that looked horrible. And again, yes, he was very green, so he didn't really know how to cover up for it. So instead of trying to do it again, he just said, fuck it, stay down. And he pinned him. It was atrociously bad. Quite frankly, I have no idea why they kept this on the taping or why they didn't try to edit it out. I mean, at least with it being taped, like Luger could have gone back and maybe tried to hit the rack again. They could have just cut the feed from the botch the first go around. But instead, they just left it in. They didn't show a replay of it, thankfully. It was such an abrupt finish. I mean, they weren't going to show Luger dropping the guy in slow motion as a shoot. But they showed Luger storming off afterwards, looking all pissed off, and that was funny. Felt bad for the guy, but yeah. I mean, we can all laugh now. It's not like it killed his career or anything. Maybe this is when the Horsemen started their early negotiation with Barry Windham about turning on Luger. This was the turning point. They said that big oaf couldn't even hit his finish without looking like a jackass. Barry, take care of this guy. Anyway, then we came back for the best moment on the show. I went back and relived this like 3 times after it was over. I was laughing my ass off the entire time. This is so much fun. Started off with a generic Ron Garvin promo, which was no fun. He's out there talking about how he's going to beat up Cornette in the cage, all the horrible shit he's going to do to him. And while he's mid-promo, we hear a voice offset screaming Ronnie's name. Turns out it's Jim Cornette. And he confronts Ronnie at the podium, obviously setting up a ploy, which Ronnie kind of fell for, hook, line, and sinker. But with the way this all churned out, the comedic relief here was almost too perfect with how everything went. First, Ronnie wraps his towel around Corny's neck, and he's pulling him over toward the podium while Cornette's struggling and trying to break free. From behind, here come Bobby Eaton and Stan Lane to blindside Roddy. Or Ronnie. Why did I call him Roddy? Sorry. Anyway, this is so phenomenal because they hit Ronnie from behind, and he ends up letting go of Cornette accidentally. And Cornette basically goes ass over tea kettle into the podium. And when I say into the podium, I do not mean onto or directly over the podium. I mean that Cornette's fat ass landed in this podium and smashed it to pieces. So much so that he actually fell inside the podium butt first. And while the Midnights are out there brawling with Ronnie's trying to fight free. You know, eventually you got Barry Windham running out there to even the score. I'm laughing my ass off. There's all this pandemonium and chaos going on out there. And there's Cornette with his ass stuck inside this little square opening in the front of the podium desk. And he's got his fucking tennis racket in his hand. And he's waving it in the air. Makes the whole thing so much better. Flailing his arms in the air, screaming for help. And I'm just sitting there like, this could not have been done any more perfectly. Cornette, as a shoot, fell into this podium and got stuck momentarily via his big bulbous ass. And all the while, these guys are just destroying the set. Barry's getting slammed into the World Championship Wrestling logo, and it ends up coming off the wall. You see this giant strip of plywood behind the set. Look jank as fuck. And the crowd's out there nutting themselves the entire time. You know, we all make jokes about how in modern wrestling these days, everybody gets into a brawl and fights off. that is exactly what they did with Ronnie, Barry, and the Midnights here. They fought out from behind the curtain. Cornette, I have no idea where he went. I think he was still trying to pull his ass out of the podium after he broke through it a minute ago. And meanwhile, once the dust finally settles, they cut to Tony and David. They're just having a ball. David's laughing. Tony's laughing. I'm laughing. This was too perfect. I went back and rewatched this over and over again. It was that damn good. Every possible bit of train wreck level TV happening in one segment. And it was all so perfectly timed. Between Cornette getting stuck in the podium, flopping his arms up and down like a penguin, the boys getting slammed into the set while shit's falling over left and right, fighting through the curtain moments later. I was like, this is the best slapstick moment in Crockett Promotions. You know, at first I was like, generic Ronnie Garvin promo, who cares? And then it became magical. And the greatness all started with the Cornette bump. I couldn't get over how great it was. All shot in one take. Unintentionally done. But Cornette earned my utmost respect here. I loved every minute of this. As did everybody else, in fact. It's interesting how that works out. When you do brawl angles in moderation, they actually get a pop. Because, surprise, surprise, when you don't see them every week, they actually have meaning. People can actually get emotionally invested in them. Because they used to be a rarity. Holy cow. It's almost like these motherfuckers knew how to do this shit right back in the day. It was a good lead into the next round of the U.S. Tag Title Tournament. Bullet Bob and Brad Armstrong versus the New Breed. And while yes, it's the New Breed, not exactly the most enthralling tag match they could have booked for a title tournament. But it was fine. For the most part, it was a one-sided beatdown with the babyfaces dominating the heels. Bob and Brad controlled a lot of the action early on. You know, occasionally the New Breed would cut them off momentarily with a flurry of moves, but they got quickly shut down and were back to working defense. When they came back from break, they did a drop-down spot where Champion caught Brad with a knee in the back, so, you know, the heels were able to work over Brad for a little bit. There were several weird moments here where Chris Champion kept cutting promos on Tony Schiavone at the booth. No idea what he was talking about, and I don't think Tony knew either because he really didn't talk about it. But as they were closing in on around the 5-minute mark, Sean Royal posts himself in the corner. The heels kept Brad isolated to prevent him from getting more tags. They did the fake-out spot where Bullet Bob tried to get in when Teddy didn't see the tag, so he got booted back out to the ring apron. And they were kind of running down the clock by this point, so the heels kept the offensive attack going. And finally, it culminated with Bullet Bob getting the hot tag with about a minute left. They were kind of doing the old Hulk Hogan bump spots where the heels just kind of sort of walked into Bob's punches and chops. Looked phonier than a football bat, but the crowd popped for everything. And after it broke down with all four guys, the bell sounded for the time limit draw. And the heels kept the attack going on Brad momentarily until Bob ran in for the save and the New Breed powdered. You know, obviously announced as a draw, so neither team advanced in the brackets. Kind of a safe way to ensure that neither team had to do the job. New Breed was still roughly a new team by this point, so beating them probably wasn't a wise move. Beating Brad and Bob wouldn't have been out of the equation, but when you consider the other teams in the tournament and who was scheduled to win the belts in the end of it, the finish made sense. You know, Ron and Barry making it to the finals was a better option than Brad and Bullet Bob. Like I said, it was a pretty good match. You know, I just can't ever get into the New Breed matches. Didn't like the gimmick. Thought it was way too hokey. I mean, I wasn't even a particular fan of Chris Champion as a singles act, much less Sean Royal and Chris Champion as a tag team. But again, you take into account they weren't around that long, so it's not like it completely killed Crockett Promotions with pushing them for that small window. Just I don't know. Really not much to say about it. Coming back, Nikita beat Thunderfoot in about a minute. That was that. And I really didn't have much to say about the Paul Jones promo that followed either. Absent from the equation were the World Tag Team Champions Rick Rude and the Raging Bull. I believe he said they were currently down in St. Petersburg, Florida, getting ready for the big special Eddie Graham Memorial event. Either that or they were in Orlando, one of the two cities. In any case, he plugged a bunch of spot shows, cut a promo on the Rock and Roll Express. I barely understood half the dialogue between the crowd screaming over him and the usual Paul Jones delivery. And then we were immediately back to the ring for Tim Horner and Baron Von Raschke versus Brody Chase and Clement Fields. For Christ knows what reason, Horner and the Baron were teaming together. Literally the epitome of just trying to find something for Horner to do, I guess. Same goes with the Baron. I thought Horner and Ole were a thing, but I think that was more of a mutual working agreement than it was a functioning tag team. The match was okay. Watching Baron wrestle in 1987 is like watching guys wrestle underwater. He was barely mobile in 1986, much less a year later working half the dates he did then. But it only went like 2 minutes, and Horner won with the bridging roll-up. Then we went over to the booth for J.J. Dillon and Lex Luger, mostly giving Luger the platform to talk about what went wrong in that match earlier with Jeff Belk. No, I'm just ribbing. Now, JG took a minute to put over the Dream Team of Flair and Luger. He also plugged a Kmart reference in 1987, which made me feel older than dirt. Thinking to myself, what other outdated references can I be reminded of going back and watching these classic wrestling tapes? A Kmart reference. Yeah, good times. Bet y'all remember when that was a thing. That and Blockbuster. Spent many a days in my childhood pursuing the aisleways of those stores. Meanwhile, Luger's taking shots at all the 9-to-5ers out there, talking about how the reason blue-collar workers don't get tanned is because they're stuck behind a desk all day sitting at a computer plugging shit in. All the while, the Horsemen are hanging out at the pool and getting ripped at the gym. Now he put over the Horsemen and talked about all their attributes. He said that it's going to be the summer of domination because the Horsemen are going to dominate the competition, including Luger's quest to become the U.S. Heavyweight Champion. And it's kind of all there was to that. He's getting better. The one thing Luger always has, even if the promo shit the bed, the guy can always make up for it by flexing at the camera. And all the girls pop for it. It's what we call working the magic. Real quickly here, Ivan and Vladimir had a match with Jeff Sampson and Cougar J. It was boring. It went 2 minutes. Petrov won with the sickle. Then we came back from break with Ivan and Vladimir at the booth so Ivan could cut a heel promo, saying the Russian chain matches are signed and Ivan's going to use those matches as a way to embarrass not only Nikita, but the entire United States. Says that he instructed Petrov not to interfere in the matches because Ivan wants to handle Nikita by himself, which I laughed at. But it's not just about embarrassing Nikita. It's about taking out the superpowers, and that includes Dusty. And with the help of Dick Murdoch too, they'll ensure that Dusty and Nikita are put down for good. All the while, Petrov continues to stand there and be completely feckless week after week. Still looking like he's trying to squeeze out a turd. From there, we cut back to the ring for Beautiful Bobby and Sweet Stan versus Bill Tabb and Larry Clark. More importantly, though, we had one of the best Cornette rants of all time. Obviously following up on what happened earlier with Cornette's bump of the year through the podium. So he was pretty pissed off here. So one of his first lines before he even covers anything that transpired earlier with Garvin and Wyndham, he begins going into a tirade about how today was the official date for the Kentucky Derby. And just to ensure that Cornette won the gamble on who would take first place, he had his mother buy all the horses. Thought to myself, that is the most random fucking thing I've ever heard in my life. But it's something I totally would expect a heated Jim Cornette to scream about on camera. Beyond that, though, this went 1 minute. The Midnights hit a high-low on Clark and won with a 2 3/4 count. And by that, I mean Bobby Eaton got up before Teddy Long counted the 3, but they still counted the pinfall anyway. And then we were back at the booth for more rambling and pouting from Cornette. In addition to plugging next week's tournament round with the Midnights and the Rock and Roll Express, he then pulled out a handwritten letter from his coat pocket. There was one decent human being that sent Cornette a personal letter trying to side with him over the conspiracy of Jim Crockett trying to force him out of the business by having him wrestle that cage match with Ronnie Garvin. And the remainder of the promo pretty much boiled down to Cornette telling Ronnie that he needed to seek professional counseling for wanting to destroy him inside the cage. Meanwhile, Cornette's all but having a seizure at the podium, talking about everything that Garvin's going to do to him, and he doesn't want to get inside the cage with him. And after the Midnights dragged Cornette out of there and brought him to a local medical facility so they can pump his lungs, Tony Schiavone just stands there and shakes his head in disappointment. I believe his exact words were, "Poor Jimmy." Folks, more action after this. Fantastic delivery. As always is with dry personality Tony Schiavone. Then we came back for a super pro babyface Ric Flair promo, calling out every locker room babyface and trying to belittle the names one at a time, the likes of which include Nikita, Dusty, and Jimmy Garvin. Meanwhile, the fans are just eating up every word the guy says, cheering him like God. Slick Rick chants all over the studio. And, Flair's out there in prime Nature Boy mode. Obviously still looking to fuck Precious, saying the only thing standing between her and Flair is that punk Jimmy Garvin. And he also took a minute to run down Ronnie, too, saying that before you know it, Ronnie will be just another guy. But after naming every big city in the country, he turned and delivered his classic line to all the girls in the studio, "None of you can be first, but a whole bunch of you could be next." And it was at that point that I determined, if I ever were to get into the pickup artistry, I would be using every Ric Flair trope in the book, up to and including the Flair flops. So, that led to the next match. The Road Warriors steamrolling over Dave Isley and Mike Force in about 15 seconds. Even though Flair was literally standing next to the ring seconds before this match began, he was already gone by the time Hawk and Animal ran out. Thought it would have been kind of fitting if they had Rick try to pass them and then on the way out, the Road Warriors just barrel over him. But clearly this was taped well after Flair was gone. And directly after the Legion of Doom won, David Crockett, without missing a beat, goes, "This is a heck of a show." Can't really dispute that. It's been a lively episode up to this point. Speaking of lively, the Road Warriors did a pissed-off promo afterwards. Animal talking about how people have been running them down for not defending the 6-man tag team championships. But that'll soon change. I wrote down, I kind of thought they just quietly retired the 6-man belts by this point. No. Apparently those are still a thing. In name only. Meanwhile, Hawk acted all creepy for a minute by talking about how all the girls want to sit on Tony Schiavone's lap. Come again? Well, in any case, He also called out Lex Luger, saying he somehow weaseled his way out of an upcoming six-man match at one of the house shows. Can't remember what city it was. But then he also made fun of his flexing pose. And I thought to myself while all this was going on, you know, the Hawk promos only get kind of wackier from this point onward. Was this sort of the precursor? Because this is a very odd Hawk promo. And, Paul Ellering chimed in there with some verbiage that I didn't really note. He had on a Rock Tavern restaurant ball cap. I believe in reference to the Rock Tavern, New York. But I could be wrong about that. He looked like he was ready to go fishing is what he looked like. Then we came back for Ron Garvin versus Larry Stevens, the main event TV match for the week, fittingly. And while it only went about a minute, it was fun listening to David Crockett describe every possible scenario of what Garvin could do to Cornette inside the cage. Basically covered everything but sodomy. Joyously thinking about Garvin beating the guy to a bloody pulp and leaving him for dead. Only David Crockett, man. Only David. But not much to say about the previous match. He won with a knockout punch. Then we came back to the booth for JJ and Tully. Another case where Tully's doing the semi-babyface promo about the Horsemen being the hardest working team in the building, despite him being a heel on television. He says that everybody loves the story of a man that pulls himself up by his bootstraps and fights from the bottom up. The Horsemen do it day in and day out where they prove they're the best at what they do in the ring. It's why Tully can afford the luxury of putting $10,000 of his own money on the line every time he gets some poor sap to sign off to work a match with him. JJ really didn't say much here. Just sort of reiterated Tully's talking points, and that's about all there was to it. And, actually, I lied. The Ron Garvin match was not the last match on the show. We had the Jimmy Garvin match with Paul Garner. Sort of glossed over that one. Wasn't much of a main event. Jimmy won in about a minute with a brainbuster. Didn't even take off the bedazzled suspenders for this one. He went in there, spiked them, and left with every hair perfectly in place. And then David and Tony signed off by doing one final plug for next week's show. More chaos and more pandemonium to come. That was their pitch. We have the Rock and Roll Express versus the Midnights in the tournament, which should be a fun segment. I'm actually kind of looking forward to seeing that match. And, well, the show was only about an hour this week. Not sure why the extra half hour got cut, but definitely made things fly by a lot quicker. Not the best show we've seen, but there were a few highlights here. Cornette's bump through the podium will forever go down as the best thing I've seen him do since the scaffold bump at Starrcade 86. And by this point, we're still a little ways out from the 87 Bash Tour. They haven't started plugging anything for that yet, but I'm sure we're still a couple weeks out from that. But this is still a relatively hot period for the company. And the summer of 87 only gets hotter, if memory serves me correctly. Both in the literal and figurative sense. Bad jokes, I know. You know who was the king of bad jokes, though? Bill Mercer. Actually, I would say he's more the king of dad jokes. On the topic of Bill Mercer, he was the host of this week's edition of World Class Championship Wrestling, a special edition feature. This was the May 5th episode, which was technically one day before they taped the Texas Stadium show. So as expected, this was sort of a video package tribute to highlight some of the key programs and touch on the important details of what's going down in the David Memorial Special. I have not looked yet, but typically when World Class would tape the Star Wars specials, they would air the matches on the subsequent TV shows, probably about 2 or 3 weeks out. So I'm going to run with the formula of what they've been doing. I probably won't spend an extensive time covering the material here since we're mainly covering old ground. If you've been following the world-class reviews on the channel, some of this stuff we've already covered multiple times over. Take, for example, the way they opened the show. The first third of the show this week was basically Mercer going through the entire timeline of the Von Erich Freebird story over the last couple years, touching on all the chapters in the story and the important details of what led up to where we are now. And when you take into account that this has been an ongoing program for pretty much 18 months, give or take, dating all the way back to the cage door angle from the Christmas Star Wars event in '82 that kind of launched the program to begin with, there was a lot to cover here, but it was a nice video package. You know, some of the footage I actually don't think we've talked about yet. We obviously saw the cage door angle from '82. That was basically what set the whole feud in motion and officially turned the Freebirds heel. There was a quick highlight reel of one of the TV main events we saw last year, the strap match with Kevin and Kerry versus Hayes and Gordy. I think we covered that on the channel. Now, the cage match from the Thanksgiving special last year, I know for a fact we didn't talk about that. And the lead up to that match, Hayes and Kerry were scheduled to work that match in the cage, and they threw in the added stipulation that the loser of the fall would not be able to wrestle in Texas for 1 calendar year. Turns out that stipulation was total bullshit anyway, because even though Hayes lost the match, he was back the following month doing a run and angle at the Christmas Star Wars event. But the cage match, they actually showed everything from like the 5-minute period onward. You know, Fritz was outside the ring watching and sort of guarding the whereabouts of the ringside in case Gordy or Buddy showed up. And they did. When Gordy came in, Fritz started to go after him. Meanwhile, Buddy sneaks in from the other side of the ring and climbs up the side of the cage so he can toss in the brass knuckles for Hayes. And that ends up backfiring because Kerry goes straight out of the playbook of the Matrix and dodges like 3 or 4 shots to the head. So he gets the gimmick and punks out Hayes with it. That is followed with Roberts attempting to climb the cage. And I am not entirely sure what the fuck happened here. I have to presume that one of two things were supposed to happen. Buddy was either supposed to dive off the cage and fail to break up the pinfall at the end, or Buddy was supposed to intentionally cock block himself on the top of the cage. He winded up doing the latter, and it looked unbelievably scary. He's standing up in the corner of the cage, and he's wobbling his arms around, like signaling that he's losing his balance. You see the cage and the wiring start to like go back and forth. And I don't think that was a work. I think Buddy legitimately lost his footing and almost died. He sort of managed to stumble and crotch himself on the top of the cage before taking a really nasty bump into the ring. Meanwhile, Gordy tried to get in the ring too, and they pulled the angle from last year in the cage and sort of gave the Freebirds their receipt. This time it's Fritz that slammed the cage door into Gordy and laid him out. And Kerry gets the win. The Freebirds are all laid out in the ring. Kerry and Fritz walk off to the back. Hayes is bleeding. Gordy's knocked loopy. Buddy's gonads are lodged into his jugular. It's like the perfect cap for all the baby faces getting put over here and giving all the heels their comeuppance. But we weren't done yet. We've established that the 6-man tag for the Texas Stadium show is going to be the Freebirds teaming up to face Kevin, Mike, and Fritz. But we're yet to really establish how we got to that point. Why Fritz came out of retirement to team up with his boys. And all of it started when Fritz was in the middle of the ring conducting an interview with Mark Lorenz in Fort Worth. Michael Hayes interrupted and demanded that Fritz spill the beans. He said the Freebirds boiled the possibilities down to 3 individuals. It was either going to be Bruiser Brody, Brian Adias, or Lance Von Erich, which I kind of chuckled at. I said, ooh, a Lance Von Erich reference in 1984. Go figure. Turns out it was none of those 3. And Fritz delivered the classic line by saying, the third partner for that six-man with the Von Erichs is going to be the next man that pops Michael Hayes right between the eyes. Pow! And down goes Hayes. Fritz throws him out of the ring like yesterday's trash, and he confirms that he will be the third man. The NWO reveal from 1996 done 12 months earlier. No, I'm just joshing. And during Fritz's sit-down with Mercer, he confirmed that NWA management permitted a scenario. If Fritz is able to win that six-man with his sons, since the match will also be for the six-man belts, if the Von Erichs win, then Kerry will be allowed to step into Fritz's place and represent the team as 1/3 of the champions. And again, Gray capped the interview with Fritz saying that he doesn't know if the Freebirds' dads ever worked them over, but he'll be sure to give them a run for their money. Now, keeping in mind, context here, Fritz had been retired from the ring for a couple years, so even though he hadn't been sitting on the shelf all that long, it was still a while he was out of the ring working consistently. Even so, I'd say out of the 6 dudes involved here, Fritz is probably the one guy I would not want to get tangled up in the ring with. That dude could stretch me with one arm tied behind his back. Look at him. Fucking gorilla. But it was a really good package. Covered a lot of ground. Tied everything together nicely. I like that they took the time to cover some of the material that we hadn't seen on the TV shows. The Fritz announcement kind of showed up in passing in the last few episodes, but it wasn't fully explained how Fritz got put into the six-man. So getting to see the actual interview in full, the whole angle with him punching Hayes out and getting the big pop in the crowd, that was good. Hayes sold it great. I think he even gigged himself for the spot, which was awesome. Looked like a pap smear more than anything, but got the point across. And before we cover the other story material, I have to take a minute to talk about this Freebirds promo. Literally filmed from the location of Bad Street. Hayes and Buddy come kicking down the front door to their humble abode. Fucking wooden boards and broken glass everywhere. Just this totally run-down house they're in. And they're doing the heat promo on Fritz. Hayes is being sure to point out that Fritz cheap-shotted him when he wasn't looking. I believe he called him a yellow-bellied dog, which is just great classic southern redneck heel verbiage. Talking about what makes the Freebirds fabulous and different from all the other teams in professional wrestling. Buddy chimes in and talks about all the legal stuff he's permitted to do in the Bad Street match. The example being him taking off his signature belt, which he personally customized to have 10 nickels plastered on the front of it. Enough to knock out a man with one shot. And of course, in saying that he specifically studded 10 nickels on the front of this belt plate, Michael Hayes had to interrupt by saying, "For those that can't do math, that's 50 cents. Hold on, let me write that one down. I was horrible at math in school, but hey, free math lessons in wrestling. It's not like it hasn't come in handy before. Just ask Scott Steiner. I learned how to do fractions thanks to Big Papa Pump. So that was all well and good. But we were missing one key component. One final piece of the trio's pie here. And that was good old Bam Bam Terry Gordy. And he comes barreling through the window. Not even the front door. The fucking side window. Breaking it with his cowboy boot. And that's obviously been another signature gimmick of the Freebirds TV matches. The cowboy boot that's come in handy a time or two. And after Gordy chucks the boot through the window and shatters the glass, he does a heel promo on Fritz and basically calls him stupid for putting himself in a vulnerable situation by getting in the ring with the Freebirds. And I just wrote down after all this was over, this is now officially my favorite heel promo of all time. And again, I talk about this all the time when I'm trying to compare modern to classic wrestling. But it's just, astonishing to me. You have classic footage like this sitting out there. Somehow we've gone to a point in the business today where promo material comes nowhere close to reaching this level. Now, yeah, this one's behind a paywall if you don't have the Peacock subscription, but it's like, come on now. You got a fucking all-time fabulous Freebirds promo on network service for a $9.99 monthly fee. You're telling me the boys can't dish out $10 a month to consume this shit? All the money Tony Khan's throwing at his boys? I don't buy it. It's like, it's the perfect combination of wacky, over-the-top, and serious, captivating storytelling. And if you ask me, well, did you go back and watch it again after it was over? You bet your fucking honky ass I did. Multiple times. Now, obviously, the Freebirds Von Erich program was not the only thing that was being advertised for the David Memorial Special. We also had the Kerry-Ric Flair World Heavyweight title feud. So we got a little compilation series to show how that feud's been brewing. And, you know, while that one's been a little more under the radar since Flair's very sporadic in the Dallas region, keep in mind, this is a program that's also been going on for a while. The cage match from the Christmas Star Wars in '82 was only the turning point for what set the Freebirds Von Erich feud in motion. But if you actually remember, and we didn't cover this on the channel because we weren't reviewing the Dallas shows by that point, but if you recall back to the summer of '82, there was a 2 out of 3 falls match at one of the Star Wars specials with Flair and Kerry for the World Heavyweight title. And that match had a controversial finish where, even though Flair retained the belt due to a double disqualification in the third fall, the first fall had some controversy. Alfred Neely, the designated NWA official for that match, got unintentionally sucker punched by Kerry when he was trying to separate Flair and Kerry. So he actually ended up disqualifying Kerry in the first fall, and then Kerry won the second fall clean, tied everything together one apiece, even though Kerry got screwed over the first go-around. So he should have arguably won the match 2-0. And the Neely thing was significant in terms of the story arc because that was sort of the catalyst that got the Dallas office involved and got the NWA office to collectively agree to make Michael Hayes the second special guest referee for the cage match, alongside David Manning, of course, just to ensure there was no controversy. Because remember, that was the story, right? The NWA official blew the call, so in order to judge that we would get a fair outcome, world-class and NWA management met so that they could have David Manning and Michael Hayes be the referees for that match. At the time, Hayes was a babyface. Keep that in mind too. So working backwards in the timeline a little bit, but it's an important detail. And of course, we all saw what happened in the cage match. And that led to Kerry being handpicked as Ric Flair's opponent for this title match here at the Texas Stadium. A title shot that was originally slated for David prior to his death, now being given to Kerry, who was the second man in line to receive his chance at redemption. Kind of a neat little way to draw that feud full circle again. And, you know, and while we really didn't get much coverage on how they selected Kerry for the title match, you can kind of see based on what they showed here, it was the right call. Kerry had unsettled business with Flair from 2 previous years ago. Now, yes, Kevin also had a title match with Flair that also ended in controversy, but, you know, the feud wasn't as heated as the one with Kerry. This one had a real sense of a blood rivalry. You know, could they have hypothetically put Kevin in that match instead? Arguably, yeah. Would it have meant as much? Probably not. You know, the history just wasn't there with Kevin and Flair like it was with Kerry. And as we'll see when we cover that match in detail, the payoff was well worth it after the 2-year wait. That is what we call long-term storytelling, people. Done the right way. The effective way. Not to get ahead of myself. Now, the last item of business on the show was the story involving Chris Adams, Jimmy Garvin, Sunshine, and Precious. And by that, I mean Precious and Sunshine as the focal points, and The guys were basically chess pieces. But in order to establish how he got from point A to point Z with the whole Jimmy Garvin, Precious, Sunshine love triangle, we kind of have to go back to how Precious was introduced in the equation. Now, you remember, when she first showed up on TV, for the first couple months, she didn't even have a name. Bill Mercer just kept calling her Sunshine number 2, or the valet for Jimmy Garvin. Or, what was she for Sunshine? The assistant. That's right. Because Jimmy Garvin brought her in to be Sunshine's personal assistant. Jimmy felt that she was working overtime to help Garvin during his matches. She would tape the film, she would help him cheat. There was a lot of work and effort that went into all that. Don't forget the chores on David's ranch, too. Can't forget about those classic angles. And once we got to the double turn with Garvin and Precious turning on Sunshine, that led to the epic press conference where Sunshine aired all of Jimmy's dirty laundry out to the public, including all the videotapes that Garvin made her record. She broke into his home and stole every last piece of footage, gave it to Chris Adams so he can study the film and know every last move that Garvin's going to do. So she double-crossed him is what she did. And, well, from there, we had, as I jotted down here, one of the many Garvin Adams TV matches they've done in the last 6 months. Time, date, place, couldn't tell you. One of the matches where Adams won the belt from Garvin, leading to the obligatory catfight afterwards. Again, one of many. And if you've been following the TV shows, the mixed tag was announced for the stadium show. Garvin and Precious versus Adams and Sunshine. And granted, they skipped out on a lot of footage here following the Sunshine face turn and all the subsequent angles with Garvin and Adams on the television shows, including all the rapid-fire title changes. But the middle section was more important here, establishing the base for how Sunshine and Garvin broke away from each other and what led up to the Garvin-Adams feud. So again, it was all very well done. I've loved every bit of this story in the last couple years. Everybody's been great. Granted, it's difficult to pay attention to a lot of the promo work from Garvin when the only thing I can really look at is Sunshine's pearly white smile. Let's go with that. She was very beautiful. It kind of makes me wish more modern women looked like her in wrestling. Back when the girls looked natural on camera. They weren't decked out in fucking makeup and had fake tits and lip fillers. Half the time, I don't even think Sunshine had eyeliner on. She was just kind of naturally pretty. They really struck a chord with her. It's a shame she didn't stay in the business longer. And, I've talked about it before. I liked Precious. She was good too, but I don't know. There was always something about Sunshine that I preferred more. But that was basically how they covered all the top 3 feuds. 45-minute package show, more or less. But it was a really good recap show. And I always like these kinds of themes once in a blue moon. Breaks up the flow of the usual match promo formula we're used to seeing. And, we get some context. It's nice to be reminded of how we got to where we are in some of these story arcs. If AEW or WWE did more stuff like this, I might actually be able to figure out what the fuck's going on more than half the time. The end goal was to build up hype for the stadium show, and they did just that. Now we just kick back and wait to see the footage on delay. Speaking of upcoming footage, or me not knowing what's going on. Let's see, what does WWE have this weekend? Is it the Backlash show? I'm trying to get my ducks in a row here so I can prep for the Monday podcast. Yes, Saturday, May 6th. Cool. In Puerto Rico. San Juan. Should be interesting. So let's see. I said I was not going to do a card preview here, but let me just kind of gloss over and see what they have currently advertised. Looks like they have 7 matches. We got the 6-man tag with Riddle, Owens, Zayn versus the Bloodline. That's Sikoa and the Usos. We have Rhea Ripley versus Zelina Vega for the SmackDown Women's title. We have Seth freaking Rollins versus Omos, because of course we do. A 3-way for the U.S. title, because obviously we have to have a multi-man match on this fucking card. It's Austin Theory, Bobby Lashley, and Bronson Reed. Bianca Belair and Io Sky for the Raw Women's title, which is kind of random. And then what is now being advertised is a San Juan street fight with Bad Bunny and Damian Priest. And I have seen a couple pics of the news bulletins covering that on the Raw show. I saw some kendo sticks, so I presume we're going to see them break out the plywood at some point. There'll probably be a table involved too, because Lord knows any hardcore match in modern wrestling ends up turning into a garbage fight. But we'll see there. That looks like the full card. If I had to venture a guess on what main events, I mean, it's got to be Cody and Brock, right? What else would? You get a main event, the Bloodline in the Riddle-Owens-Zayn match? I mean, you could, hypothetically. If you do a blow-off angle at the end where maybe Sikoa turns on the Usos and lays them out, maybe you get Roman involved in there. I mean, I'm looking right now. Roman doesn't seem to be advertised for this show in any way, but doesn't mean he can't make a cameo appearance. So there are a couple possibilities, but it's kind of a typical house show card. Not really a whole lot that appeals to me. I mean, I already said I wasn't going to be covering that show extensively, and now that I'm seeing everything in full here, it kind of validates why I probably don't want to spend a whole lot of time talking about it. But I'll give it a shot. I'll watch it. I'm paying for it, so might as well. And then they have the Night of Champions show, which is on the 27th. Oh my God. What is that, like 3 weeks out then? That's a Saudi Arabia show. Oh yeah, that's right. The World Heavyweight Championship match they have advertised for the Raw brand. Oh, good Lord. Everything's just so nonsensical anymore. Well, in any case, you guys can check out the Monday show for that. We'll also have the SmackDown and the Retro Raw report. I'll cover what I can with the SmackDown show. I don't know how long I'll spend covering that, but we'll see. The draft is officially finalized now. I just realized I didn't even bother talking about that either. Do I even want to look at the end result here? Let's see. Just mildly curious now. Bleacher Report has something up. Oh, here, let me just go to WWE's website. Full 2023 result drafts, or draft results. All right, so we already talked about, let's see. We already talked about night 1 because that was on SmackDown. All right, here's night 2 from May 1st. Round 1. Going to Raw, the SmackDown Women's Champion Rhea Ripley. Because of fucking course. What are they going to do, like a belt swap or something? Are they going to have a winner take all? Who fucking knows? Going to SmackDown, we have the U.S. Champion Austin Theory, which isn't all that surprising. I mean, what did they just drafted Gunther over to Raw, right? And he's the Intercontinental Champion, so they were going to need a mid-card champion over on SmackDown. So I'm okay with that. You know, I like Theory. I know he gets a bad reputation from a lot of fans out there, but I think the guy's talented. And if they're going to end up pushing him as one of their bigger attractions down the road, you know, it's good to keep up with them. So it's a fine trade-off. Raw, we got Seth freaking Rollins. I don't care. They can keep him. SmackDown is keeping Charlotte Flair, unfortunately. They have here as a Asterisk, Brock Lesnar announced as a free agent by Triple H. Translation, he'll just jump around to both shows and nobody's going to bat an eyelash about it. So again, in other words, the brand split doesn't mean jack shit. For round 2, going to Raw, the undisputed tag team champions, Sami Zayn and Kevin Owens. Okay. So, they're currently the champions of both brands. So, does that mean they have to drop the SmackDown belts and then keep the Raw titles over there? Or do they just do more crossing over to both shows? Who knows? Apparently, the Usos are staying on SmackDown. Okay, so we'll see how the Bloodline story facilitates there. Looks like the Judgment Day are staying on Raw, which I'm fine with. I mean, they bet on both brands anyway. SmackDown, we got Rey Mysterio, Santos Escobar, and the rest of the LWO goofs. Okay. Round 3, Liv Morgan and Raquel Rodriguez, Gonzalez, Gomez, Sanchez, they're going to go to Raw. They're the they're the WWE Tag Team Champions. SmackDown is getting Asuka. The New Day is going over to Raw. Only announced is Xavier Woods and Kofi Kingston, though. There's no mention of Big E. SmackDown, we're keeping the Brawling Brutes, unfortunately. Whatever. More piss break segments for me, I guess. Round 4, Trish Stratus is staying on Raw. Okay. Karrion Kross and Scarlett are apparently on SmackDown now, or at least are staying there. So whatever that tease was with the Shinsuke Nakamura program, I guess that's just getting cut. Raw, Shayna Baszler and Ronda Rousey are staying there. SmackDown is keeping LA Knight.
Yeah! I said pipe down, I'm talking.
Fuck yeah. Good. I'm glad. I need Mr. LA Knight on my SmackDown brand every week. He's one of the only highlights. Yeah. Whose game is it? It's LA Knight's game. Yeah. Good. All right, round 5, Braun Strowman and Ricochet are going over to Raw. Oh, thank God. Get Bocce the Strowman off my TV as quickly as possible. Let him go ransack the other brand and have terrible TV matches over there. Let's see. Shotzi is on SmackDown. Who fucking cares? Bronson Reed is on Raw. He's staying there at least. SmackDown is getting pretty deadly. Elton Prince and Kit Wilson. What the fuck are those guys? Oh, wait, those are the, those guys used to be on the NXT UK show, right? So they've been down in developmental then? Well, I guess that would be another call-up then. All right. Round 6, going over to Raw will be the Alpha Academy, which, well, they were already over there, right? Okay, whatever. Rick Boogs is on SmackDown. The fuck, who cares? Katana Chance and Kaden Carter are on Raw. I believe those girls were also down in NXT. What was Katana Chance's name? It was something else. I can't remember. She was a little girl. Tiny girl, but hell of an athlete. I remember being relatively surprised by her in NXT. I actually kind of thought she had some potential that they kind of blew. Ooh, this is a good pick. Cameron Grimes going to SmackDown. Hell yeah. I haven't talked about Cameron Grimes in a long time. Where the hell's that guy been? I miss Cameron Grimes. Oh, maybe they could, what was the feud he did with LA Knight? Was that in NXT too, a couple years ago? Maybe they could try to bring some of the spark back there. I'm actually kind of excited about that. I'm kind of looking forward to seeing what they do with him. Anyway. I guess that was it. Covered everything. Oh, no. I forgot about this. WWE Raw Talk Sessions, or talk selections. What is that? Is that some kind of like YouTube show or something? Oh, okay, I see. I guess this is all the names that did not get mentioned as part of the two nights. Yeah, these were all like the leftovers, basically. All right, so on Raw, we have Akira Tozawa, Angelo and Umberto, Dana Brooke, Emma, Indu Sher. Who the fuck is that? Johnny Gargano, Nikki Cross, Odyssey Jones, Piper Niven, Riddick Moss, Tegan Knox, and Xia Li. And on SmackDown, we got Grayson Waller and Tamina. Yay. And in the free agents category, we have Baron Corbin, Shelton Benjamin, and Cedric Alexander, Elias, and Zion Quinn. My God, these fucking names get dumber and dumber. All right. And we already talked about night one, so we don't really need to cover that. And then, of course, we have the rest of the rosters the rest of the roster selections, which will happen after the Backlash show. So we'll see what they dish out for the remainder of the 200 and something names they've got under contract. Whatever. So there's your abrupt notes on the updated draft picks. Again, it'll probably all amount to nothing by the end of it, but we'll see. In any case, we'll be back on the Monday show for more wrestling coverage. Thanks for tuning in. Make sure you guys subscribe, comment, like the show, all that good jazz, and have a good one. Take care. Peace out.